After 14 brutal hours on the job, grease-stained hands, boots reeking of motor oil and sawdust, I pull in to see my lawn covered in fresh-cut branches from the giant oak Grandpa planted when I was born. Under my wiper, a citation. No call, no ask. The HOA president had chainsaws invade my property like it was public land. She opens her door smiling.
I did you a favor, Mr. Calloway. That eyesore was dragging down values. You're welcome.
I didn't lose it. I just nodded and planned. Legally. Financially brutal. Publicly humiliating. One night later, her smug favor turned into the costliest mistake her HOA ever made, and the whole street paid the price. You won't believe how I did it. What's the worst thing your HOA pulled on you? Share below. Wildest stories get pinned. Tag your city/state. HOA nightmares are exploding. Let me take you back to the fall of 2019. Specifically, to the day my wife Darlene and I closed on our house in Clover Ridge Estates, a quiet little subdivision outside Knoxville, Tennessee. Clover Ridge wasn't fancy. It wasn't meant to be. It was the kind of neighborhood where people kept American flags on their porches and left casseroles on your doorstep when someone had surgery. The lots were generous, a quarter-acre each, and the streets were lined with mature trees that had been growing since the Carter administration. That was the whole point. We weren't buying a house, we were buying roots. Our property had 3 white oaks across the back fence line, and 1 massive red oak right out front, 70-some feet tall, with a trunk so wide you couldn't wrap your arms around it even if you tried. I'm a carpenter by trade, so I know trees. That red oak was healthy, structurally sound, and worth somewhere between $4,000 and $10,000 in appraised landscape value. I know this because I looked it up. Twice. I'm that kind of guy. The HOA, the Clover Ridge Homeowners Association, had been around since the subdivision was built in 1991. For most of its life, it was a gentle, mostly useless entity that sent occasional newsletters about gutter cleaning and reminded people not to park boats in their driveways. A $90 a month fee covered landscaping in the common areas and the occasional pothole patch on the private roads. Then, in early 2021, the HOA board had an election, and that's where Beverly Mitch entered the picture. Beverly, 2 E's, she'd correct you, was 61 years old, recently retired from some mid-level administrative job at the county courthouse, and had apparently decided that her next act in life was to run Clover Ridge with the iron fist of a woman who had way too much time and way too little self-awareness. She ran for HOA president unopposed because nobody else wanted the job. That's how these things always start, isn't it? The first month, she sent out a 12-page updated Community Standards Handbook. 12 pages. For a neighborhood of 43 houses. The handbook covered everything from acceptable mailbox colors, no black, no red, to visual harmony guidelines for holiday decorations. There was an entire paragraph, I'm not exaggerating, about wind chimes. I should have felt the temperature dropping right then. I didn't. I figured she'd burn herself out in 6 months, like every other person who discovers HOA power for the first time. I was wrong. The first unfair act happened in March 2021, on a Tuesday morning. I was inside the house, drinking coffee, when I heard it. The unmistakable whine of a gas-powered pole saw, cutting through morning quiet like a dentist's drill through silence. There's a specific sound a chainsaw makes when it hits live wood. It's lower, wetter, almost reluctant, and when I heard it, I felt it in my back teeth. I stepped outside in my socks onto the cold concrete of the porch. The kind of March morning where the air smells like frozen mud and last night's rain. And I watched a 2-man crew systematically remove 3 major limbs from my red oak tree. The limbs were hanging over the sidewalk. Beverly had decided they were a hazard to pedestrian safety. She had hired a landscaping company, Boyd & Sons, I'd later find out, and authorized the trim without contacting me, without a written notice, without a knock on my door. When I walked over and asked what was going on, one of the crew guys shrugged and handed me a folded piece of paper. A citation for overhanging vegetation in violation of Section 4.2 of the Community Standards. Section 4.2, in a document that hadn't existed 14 months ago. I stood there in my socks, gravel biting into my feet through the thin cotton, holding a citation for a tree they'd already cut. Not a warning, not a conversation. a fait accompli. That was the first time. It was not the last. I'm a patient man. Ask Darlene. Ask my crew foreman Teddy, who has watched me rework the same cabinet joint 4 times without swearing once. Patience is how I'm built. So after the first trim, I did something that, in retrospect, was naive, but felt reasonable at the time. I knocked on Beverly's door. She lived 3 houses down, in a beige colonial with decorative shutters that didn't actually close. I noticed that detail because I'm a carpenter. Fake shutters are a personal offense. She answered the door in a pressed blouse at 9 in the morning, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, looking like she'd been expecting me. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "That's me, Garrett Calloway. I was wondering when you'd stop by." She was pleasant about it in that specific way that some people are pleasant, where you can feel the dismissal underneath every smile, like a splinter beneath paint. She explained that the HOA had the authority under the CC and RS. That's the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the governing document every HOA runs on, to enforce nuisance abatement on any property in the community. The overhanging limbs, she said, were a liability. She'd done me a favor by having them handled. She handed me a copy of the relevant section, highlighted in yellow. The CC and RS were 30 years old. The language was vague, the way lawyers write things when they want maximum flexibility. Nuisance abatement could technically mean anything from a fallen fence to a broken-down car. Whether it extended to trimming a neighbor's private tree was, at minimum, debatable. I told her I'd like to be notified before any future work on my property. I was polite. I used my indoor voice. She said she'd take that under advisement, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of a door closing in your face. I went home, made another cup of coffee, and pulled up the CC&R document on my laptop. I read the whole thing, all 47 pages. Darlene sat across the table from me, watching a cooking show, and I remember the smell of garlic and butter from the screen, mixing with the particular stale paper smell that comes off old PDF scans. I made notes in a legal pad, old habit from dealing with contractors. There were things in that document Beverly hadn't mentioned. We'll get to those. For now, 2 months passed. Quiet months. Spring came in, the oak started leafing out again despite losing those limbs. Trees are stubborn like that, and I started to think maybe we'd reached an understanding. Then June arrived, and with it, the rain. Knoxville gets heavy summer storms, the kind that roll through fast and drop 2 inches in 40 minutes before moving on. After one such storm in late June, a small section of my back fence, pressure-treated pine, about 8 feet of it, had a board pop loose at the base where water had pooled. It wasn't fallen, it wasn't collapsed. One board, slightly kicked out at the bottom. Within 48 hours, I had a formal written notice from Beverly, printed on HOA letterhead. She had actual letterhead now, citing me for a fence integrity violation and informing me I had 14 days to repair or face a $75 per day fine. Here's what I want you to understand. I was going to fix it anyway. That weekend. I'd already bought the screws. But something about the tone of that letter, the officiousness of it, the letterhead, the fine threat before I'd even had a chance to respond, it got under my skin. The scent of something sour had started to drift through Clover Ridge, and it was coming from Beverly's direction. I fixed the fence board, but I also did something else. I filed a written response to the HOA, certified mail, return receipt requested, formally contesting the original tree trimming action and requesting in writing the full authorization documentation and contractor invoices. I framed it as a routine records request, totally reasonable, totally legal. Beverly's response arrived 9 days later. The authorization documentation was thin, a single internal memo signed only by herself, no board vote recorded, no second signature. Takeaway for anyone paying attention. Under most state HOA statutes and CC and R structures, unilateral actions by a single board member, especially those involving work on private property, require full board approval. One signature isn't a board vote. I highlighted that memo in yellow, same color she'd used. I put it in a folder. I labeled the folder Exhibit A, because I was already thinking about what came after Exhibit A. By August, Beverly had found her rhythm. 2 more neighbors, Dale Prescott on the corner lot, retired electrician, and Wanda Forsythe 2 streets over, who grew vegetables in raised beds, had each received citations. Dale's was for a basketball hoop in his driveway that he used with his grandkids on weekends. Wanda's was for her garden beds, which Beverly had determined were inconsistent with the community's aesthetic character. Wanda's raised beds were tidy, productive, and painted the same shade of brown as her fence. But they were visible from the street. People in the neighborhood started talking, not loudly, not yet, but in the way people talk when they're embarrassed about something happening in their own community and aren't quite ready to do anything about it. The guy at the end of the cul-de-sac, a retired army man named Bart Schilling, who'd lived in Clover Ridge for 19 years, told me at his mailbox one evening that Beverly had told him his truck, a 2009 F250 he used for a side-hauling business, diminished curb appeal and needed to be garaged or removed. Bart didn't have a garage. The summer air smelled like cut grass and distant charcoal grills, and the conversations were getting longer and harder at those mailboxes. Something was changing in Clover Ridge's atmosphere, and it had the slow pressure drop feeling of a storm still over the next ridge. In September, Beverly made her first major move against me directly. I came home one Friday afternoon to find a bright orange door hanger on my front door, the kind contractors leave when they can't get inside. Boyd and Sons, the same landscaping crew from the spring. They'd been back while I was at work, and this time they hadn't just trimmed. They'd removed an entire lower canopy branch from the red oak, a structural branch, maybe 8 inches in diameter at the base. The cut was clean but wrong, too close to the collar, in a way that could invite disease into the cambium layer. I stood on my porch and actually felt something loosen in my chest. Not grief exactly, more like the cold clarity you get when something shifts from annoying to serious. The door hanger had a contact number. I called it. The crew lead, a polite young guy named Marcus, who clearly had no idea he was in the middle of a property rights dispute, told me they'd been contracted by the HOA, had a signed work order, and had proceeded under the assumption that HOA authorization was sufficient. It wasn't, but Marcus didn't know that. I called a certified arborist named Philip Draper that same evening. Philip came out the next morning, walked around the oak, and wrote me a formal assessment. The branch removal had reduced the tree's structural integrity in a way that would require monitoring. More importantly, the cut location created a significant probability of fungal entry, per his report. The damage was estimated at $2,800 in arboricultural value. He charged me $350 for the report. Best $350 I ever spent. Here's the legal concept I want you to file away. In most U.S. states, unauthorized alteration of landscaping on private property, especially trees with established appraised value, constitutes a form of property damage that can be pursued in civil court, regardless of any HOA covenant language. The HOA does not own your tree. Exhibit B was now in the folder alongside Exhibit A. The folder was getting thicker. Meanwhile, I'd been doing something else quietly. I'd been talking to neighbors, not rabble-rousing, just listening, taking notes, asking questions. I discovered that at least 6 households had received citations or notices in the past 4 months. 3 of them had paid fines without questioning whether the fines were legitimately authorized. That was money Beverly had collected without a documented board vote approving the fine schedule she was using. The fine schedule, by the way, was new. It had been added to the Community Standards Handbook she'd published, but it had never been formally adopted by the full HOA board. The board had 2 other members, a quiet, retired teacher named Phyllis, who basically did whatever Beverly said, and a younger guy named Corbin, who'd been traveling for work all summer and had missed every meeting. Corbin, I decided, deserved a phone call. I dialed his number on a Sunday afternoon while Darlene's wind chimes, yes, we had wind chimes, Section 7B, be damned, clinked softly in the breeze. He answered on the 3rd ring, and what he told me made the whole picture snap into focus. He hadn't approved any fines. He hadn't approved the landscaping contract. He hadn't even seen the new Community Standards Handbook until I sent him a copy via email that evening. Corbin was furious. We talked for 40 minutes. October in East Tennessee is the kind of beautiful that makes you forgive the whole rest of the year. The maples go orange-red, the oaks turn copper and rust, and the whole hillside looks like it's been set on fire in the best possible way. I normally love October. That year, I was too busy building a case to appreciate the foliage. Corbin and I had started having weekly calls. He was meticulous, kept his own notes, requested HOA bank statements through proper board channels, and started documenting every communication with Beverly. What he found when he got access to the HOA accounts was troubling. The fines collected from neighbors, upwards of $2,100 over 4 months, had been deposited into the general operating account, with no line-item documentation of what they were spent on. The landscaping contractor, Boyd & Sons, had been paid $4,400 over 3 visits. The invoices showed work on common area vegetation management, but 2 of those visits, Corbin and I were pretty sure, were the tree work on my property and potentially another neighbor's hedges. Work on private property billed as common area work. That's not just a procedural irregularity, that's potentially fraud. I want to be careful here. I'm not a lawyer, and at this point neither Corbin nor I had engaged one. But we both knew the smell of something wrong, and this had a very specific smell, the dry, slightly metallic scent of money that's moved without explanation. Beverly, for her part, had no idea we were comparing notes. She continued operating as if the HOA were her personal fiefdom. In mid-October, she sent out a community-wide notice announcing a new tree canopy management policy, a document she had written herself and was presenting not as a proposal but as an established rule. It retroactively authorized the HOA to trim or remove any tree within 15 feet of a public sidewalk or common area, at the HOA's discretion, with 48-hour notice to the homeowner. 48 hours, for trees that had been growing for 30 years. The notice also included, almost as an afterthought, a new fee schedule for the tree registry program. All homeowners with trees in the designated zones would now pay an additional $25 per month for canopy monitoring. That was the moment I stopped being strategically patient and started being strategically aggressive. I called Dale Prescott. I called Wanda Forsyth. I called Bart Schilling. I called 4 more neighbors who'd been on the receiving end of Beverly's citations. I organized a neighborhood meeting at my house on a Saturday morning, the kind of meeting where people bring coffee cake and leave with a plan. 11 people showed up. Darlene made 2 pots of coffee and put out a box of glazed donuts from the Kroger on Merchant Drive. The living room smelled like warm sugar and nervous energy. I laid out everything on the coffee table. Exhibit A, the single signature memo. Exhibit B, the arborist's assessment. Corbin's financial summary. The unauthorized fine schedule. The history of citations. The new tree canopy policy, which nobody had voted on. The room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when people who've been separately frustrated discover they've all been dealt from the same crooked deck. Bart Schilling said, "So she's been doing this to all of us." Not a question, a recognition. Wanda Forsyth, who I didn't know well before that morning, turned out to have a law degree. She'd practiced briefly before moving into social work. She wasn't current on HOA law specifically, but she could read a statute. That afternoon, she pulled up Tennessee Code Annotated Section 66-27, the state's Homeowners Association Act, and started going through it with a yellow highlighter. She found the section that matters. Under Tennessee law, HOA boards cannot impose new assessments or fees without a vote of the full board, properly noticed and documented. Unauthorized fee collection can constitute an ultra vires act, beyond the board's legal authority, and collected funds may be recoverable by homeowners. Recoverable. That word landed in the room like a stone in still water. 11 faces looked at each other. Then everybody looked at me. "How do you want to play this?" Dale asked. I picked up my coffee cup. It was a ceramic mug with a carpenter's square on it. Darlene gave it to me the first Christmas after I started my own shop. "Slowly," I said, "and completely." The real discovery happened on a Wednesday night in early November, when Corbin emailed me a scanned document at 11:47 p.m. with the subject line, "You need to see this." He'd been digging through the HOA's archived records, physical files that had been stored in a banker's box at the property management office that had handled Clover Ridge's administrative work back before Beverly had taken over and switched to self-management. The property management company still had the originals of all foundational documents going back to 1991. And in those documents, Corbin had found something extraordinary. The original CC&Rs, the founding document, the real one, not the one Beverly had been citing, contained a clause that nobody in the current neighborhood seemed to know about. Section 11.4. tucked in the back, 3 pages before the signature block, in the kind of dense legal language that makes eyes glaze over. Section 11. 4 stated that any board action affecting the landscaping of individual private lots, not common areas, individual lots, required written consent from the affected homeowner and approval of no less than 2/3 of the full HOA board. One board member alone could not authorize it. The board as a whole couldn't authorize it without homeowner consent. Both. Required. Every single tree trim Beverly had authorized on my property, and, as we later confirmed, on 3 other properties in the neighborhood, had been done in direct violation of the HOA's own founding covenant. This wasn't a gray area. This wasn't a technicality. This was a structural violation of the governing document Beverly had been selectively quoting for months. There was more. Section 11.4 had a remedy clause. It stated that any unauthorized action taken against the homeowner's private landscaping entitled the affected homeowner to restoration or compensatory damages at the HOA's expense, not to exceed the assessed value of the affected vegetation as determined by a licensed arborist. I already had a licensed arborist's report for $2,800, but the bigger revelation was something Wanda found the next day when she pulled county property records and cross-referenced them with the HOA's service contract. Boyd & Sons, the landscaping crew Beverly kept hiring, was owned by a man named Stuart Boyd. Stuart Boyd was Beverly's brother-in-law. She had been awarding no-bid contracts to a family member's company using HOA funds, without board approval, without disclosure. The $4,400 in landscaping invoices, which we'd already suspected were partly for private property work, now had a layer of potential self-dealing on top of them. Corbin forwarded everything to an HOA attorney he'd found through the Tennessee Community Association Institute. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who billed by the quarter hour and didn't waste any of them, reviewed the documents and called us back in 2 days. "You have a viable claim for breach of fiduciary duty," she said. "You have a potential recovery of unauthorized fees, and the self-dealing with the contractor is something the Tennessee Secretary of State's office would be very interested in seeing." She said it the way someone reads a menu, calm, matter-of-fact, like these were just the items available. "What's the move?" Corbin asked. Patricia paused. "You build the complete record first. You don't tip your hand. Then you present it in a public forum where she can't manage the narrative afterward." She charged us $420 for that call. We split it 11 ways, $38 a person for a legal strategy that was about to change everything. Sometimes you get what you pay for. Sometimes you get a lot more. November and December were the quietest 2 months in Clover Ridge, on the surface anyway. From the outside, I was just a carpenter going to work and coming home. Darlene had her book club on Thursdays. The red oak out front lost its leaves and stood bare against the gray sky, the wound from Beverly's unauthorized cut visible as a dark oval on the bark. I checked it every morning. It wasn't spreading. The tree was going to make it. Below the surface, 11 homeowners were running a very deliberate operation. The first component was documentation. Wanda, who had more organizational patience than the rest of us combined, built a master file, Google Drive folder, properly permissioned, every document scanned and labeled, every citation received by every neighbor, every fine paid, with bank statements, every meeting notice Beverly had sent, cross-referenced against whether proper legal notice requirements had been met. Tennessee HOA law requires that board meeting notices be sent to all homeowners at least 10 days in advance for any meeting where votes on assessments or policy changes will occur. Beverly had been sending notices by door hanger, sometimes 2 or 3 days before a meeting. Not compliant. The legal structure of our play had 3 layers. Layer 1. Tennessee Code Annotated Section 66-27-510 gives homeowners the right to inspect HOA records on demand. We submitted formal written records requests, all 11 of us, on the same day, certified mail, for every financial record, every contract, every board resolution from the past 2 years. Legally, Beverly had 15 days to comply. This was not a request she could quietly ignore, and we knew it would rattle her. The takeaway: HOA members in most states have a legal right to inspect financial records and meeting minutes. A written records request puts the board on notice and starts a clock. Layer 2. We engaged Patricia, the attorney, to send a formal demand letter to the HOA, identifying the Section 11.4 violations, the unauthorized fee collections, and the contractor conflict of interest. The letter demanded a halt to all further private property tree work, a refund of all improperly collected fines, and a special meeting of the full HOA membership, not just the board, within 30 days. This is called a special meeting demand, and under Tennessee law, if 10% or more of the HOA membership requests it in writing, the board is legally required to hold it. We had 11 households. The association had 43. We were at 25.6% of membership. The board had no choice. The takeaway. In most U.S. states, a sufficient percentage of HOA members can force a special meeting and force a vote, even over the objections of the sitting board. Know your state's threshold. Layer 3, and this was the one that made people's eyes light up at our kitchen table meetings, was the property value piece. Here's something most people don't know. HOA dysfunction, documented conflicts of interest, and ongoing legal disputes are all material facts that must be disclosed during a home sale in Tennessee. If an HOA is under active legal challenge or has known financial irregularities, that disclosure requirement can materially affect the marketability of homes in the community. Beverly owned her home in Clover Ridge. So did the families who'd been quietly enabling her. If this dispute went public and entered the public record, which it would once the attorney's demand letter was filed, every potential buyer for any house in Clover Ridge would see it in their title search and disclosure review. Bart Schilling, who had bought and sold several properties over the years, put it plainly. She's sitting on $340,000 of house. If buyers start asking questions about HOA litigation and self-dealing, that property doesn't move at list price. That was the trimming their property value part of this story. Not a metaphor, an actual, real mechanism. The same way she'd used process and documentation to chip away at my tree and my peace of mind, we were using process and documentation to chip away at the financial security of anyone who'd enabled this. The final element of the plan was the public meeting itself. Patricia advised us to treat it like a formal proceeding. Printed packets for every attendee with the key documents tabbed and highlighted. Clear speaking order, witnesses present. Dale Prescott had a nephew who worked at the Knoxville Sentinel. Not a reporter, the nephew worked in ad sales, but he knew reporters, and a story about HOA self-dealing and unauthorized contractor relationships was exactly the kind of hyper-local corruption story that community journalists ate with a spoon. We set the meeting date for the third Saturday in January. Then we waited, which was the hardest part. The winter air outside smelled like wood smoke and cold patience, and every time I looked at the scar on my oak tree, I felt the clock ticking forward. Beverly was not the kind of person who received a formal attorney's demand letter and quietly reconsidered her life choices. She received it on December 14th, Corbin confirmed via the certified mail tracking, and within 72 hours, she had done 3 things. First, she sent a community-wide email labeling our records requests as harassment and suggesting that a small group of disgruntled homeowners was attempting a hostile takeover of the association. The email had the kind of breathless energy that you recognize when someone is scared and trying not to show it. Second, she called an emergency board meeting, just herself and Phyllis, the rubber stamp board member, and voted to retroactively approve all of her previous actions, including the landscaping contract with Boyd & Sons. 2 people, she counted herself. Patricia had anticipated exactly this, and had already written us a 1-paragraph explanation of why retroactive self-approval by an interested party doesn't cure a prior breach of fiduciary duty. Legal concepts are funny that way. Third, she showed up at Dale Prescott's door. Dale told me about it that same evening, standing in his driveway in the December cold, his breath making small clouds. Beverly had come by, unannounced, and had a conversation with him that he described as friendly in a threatening way. She'd suggested that Dale's outstanding fence citation, she'd issued him one back in the fall, could be resolved if he withdrew from the records request. She'd used the word withdrawn very specifically, like she'd rehearsed it. That was attempted coercion of a witness in what was now becoming a formal legal matter. Dale, to his eternal credit, said, "Beverly, I'm going to need you to put that in writing." She did not put it in writing. She left. But Dale called me the minute her car turned the corner, and I called Patricia. Patricia said 2 words: "Keep notes." Then she spent the next 10 minutes explaining that if Beverly approached any other homeowners in a similar manner, it could constitute witness tampering in the context of the upcoming demand proceedings. Beverly's second campaign was subtler, a social media whisper operation, running through a private Facebook group for Clover Ridge residents that she'd created and moderated. She began posting updates that characterized our legal action as being driven by me, personally, Garrett Calloway, who didn't like rules, who always had problems with the board, who had an axe to grind. She never used names, but in a 43-household subdivision, everyone knew who she was talking about. Some people believed her. I won't pretend otherwise. 3 or 4 families who'd been quietly sympathetic went quiet in a different way after those posts. The way people go quiet when they don't want to pick a side. I understood it. I didn't like it, but I understood it. What Beverly didn't know was that several people were screenshotting those posts and sending them to me, including Phyllis, the other board member, who had apparently started having second thoughts somewhere around the time she realized she'd co-signed actions that were now the subject of an attorney's demand letter. Phyllis called Corbin in late December, just before Christmas. She was frightened. She'd been a high school English teacher for 31 years, and serving on the HOA board had seemed like a nice way to stay involved in her community in retirement. She hadn't known about the contractor relationship. She hadn't known about the Section 11.4 violations. She'd been signing things Beverly put in front of her, trusting that Beverly knew what she was doing. Phyllis agreed to provide a written statement confirming that she had not received full information before co-signing the landscaping authorizations. She agreed to support calling the special membership meeting. The board was now, effectively, 2-1 against Beverly. She didn't know that yet. January was coming. The special meeting was set. The documents were organized in 11 matching packets. Patricia had prepped speaking points. Dale's nephew had passed our story summary to a reporter named Sean at the Sentinel, who'd expressed interest. The only wild card was Beverly herself, and wild cards, by definition, do unpredictable things when they feel cornered. On January 14th, 6 days before the meeting, Beverly filed a counter-complaint with the county's HOA mediation office, claiming that the records requests and attorney's letter constituted coordinated interference with the HOA board's lawful authority. It was a delay tactic, nothing more. The mediation office has no authority to halt a special membership meeting, but it signaled that she was willing to make noise all the way to the end. Fine by us. We liked noise. We'd built a sound system. The week before the meeting, things got genuinely strange. On Monday, a truck from Boyd & Sons, Beverly's brother-in-law's company, appeared on the street near the common area entrance. Just parked there, not doing anything. Just there, for 3 days. Dale thought it was intimidation theater. Bart thought it might be legitimate maintenance. I thought it was both. Doing real work as cover for visible presence. A reminder that Beverly still had relationships and resources she could deploy. I photographed it every morning, added the photos to the drive folder, labeled them by date and time. On Wednesday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice, flat, professional, identified himself as representing a property management consulting firm that had been retained by a community stakeholder to explore resolution options. He wanted to know if I'd be interested in a settlement conversation before the meeting. I asked him to send me the name of his firm and the name of his client in writing. He said he'd follow up. He never did. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, and Darlene sitting across from me reading, and I thought about what Patricia had said early on. Don't tip your hand. We were 6 days out. The packets were printed. The documents were in order. The reporter from the Sentinel had confirmed he'd be there. We had 13 households committed to attending, not just our original 11, but 2 additional families who'd been watching the situation develop and had decided which side of history they wanted to be on. I thought about the red oak out front, standing bare in the January cold, the cut scar sealed over and dark on its trunk. Trees don't get even with the people who cut them. They just keep growing, keep pushing upward, reaching for light, expanding their canopy a little more each year. I had a lot of respect for that oak by now. Beverly made her final move on Friday, 2 days before the meeting. She distributed, to every mailbox in Clover Ridge, a 4-page document she was calling the Community Truth Report. It was her account of the events of the past year. My tree was dangerous. The trimming was necessary. The fines were legitimate. The contractor was competitively priced. And the small group of agitators trying to undermine the HOA were doing so out of personal grievance rather than community interest. The document was polished. Beverly knew how to write. She'd spent years in county administration. It was persuasive in a selective fact kind of way. It cited the sections of the CC and Rs that supported her, while omitting Section 11.4 entirely. It described Boyd & Sons as a trusted local vendor, without mentioning the familial connection. We let it land. We did not respond. We did not send countermailers. We did not post in the Facebook group. We just let Friday and Saturday tick by. Saturday morning I woke up early, the sky outside still purple-gray, and I walked outside in my coat to stand next to the red oak for a minute. The bark was cold and rough under my palm, the texture of something that had been here a long time and planned to keep being here. The neighborhood was completely still. Even the birds weren't up yet. I went inside, made a full pot of coffee, helped Darlene move the furniture to make room for the folding chairs we'd rented from the rental place on Alcoa Highway, put a fresh legal pad next to my chair, set out water glasses on the table. The meeting was at 10 o'clock. By 9:40, there were cars parked along the whole length of our street. By 9:55, our living room and dining room were full of people. 31 homeowners out of 43 total in Clover Ridge, plus Sean from the Sentinel with a notebook, plus Patricia via video call on my laptop, propped open on the bookshelf, plus Phyllis, the second board member, sitting quietly in the corner, with her hands folded in her lap like a woman at her own reckoning. Beverly arrived at 10:03, walked in through the front door that I'd deliberately left open, saw the room, and went perfectly still. I watched her face cycle through something: surprise, calculation, the specific gray quality of a person who has just understood that the story she told herself about this situation was not the story happening in front of her. "Come on in, Beverly," I said. "We saved you a seat. I want you to picture this room. 31 homeowners seated in rows of folding chairs in a carpenter's living room in Knoxville, Tennessee, on a bright, cold Saturday morning in January. Coffee cups in hand, a printed packet on every seat, 22 pages, tabbed and labeled, everything organized the way a man who builds things for a living knows how to organize things. Patricia on a laptop screen, framed in a bookshelf between Darlene's pottery collection and my complete set of fine woodworking magazines. Sean from the Sentinel in the back row with his notebook open. And Beverly Mitch, standing in the doorway, wearing a pressed blazer and the expression of someone who had expected to walk into a confrontation and had instead walked into a proceeding. She sat. The seat we'd saved for her was in the front row, where she would face the room, where the room could face her. Corbin opened the meeting as the board member who had called it. He kept it brief, stated the purpose, referenced the governing documents, noted that this was a properly noticed special membership meeting with quorum present. 31 of 43 households, 72%, a landslide. Then I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't editorialize. I walked through the packets page by page. Section 11.4 of the founding CC and Rs. The single signature memo that wasn't a board vote. The arborist's report. The financial records showing the payments to Boyd & Sons. The Tennessee Secretary of State business records showing Boyd & Sons registered owner, Stuart Boyd, with his home address listed, the same home address as Beverly's sister. I heard the room shift, not loud, just a collective intake, the sound of people updating their understanding. I read Phyllis's written statement aloud. She didn't look up from her lap, but she didn't object. Then Wanda stood up and walked through the legal framework. Ultra-virus fee collection. The homeowner's right to recover unauthorized assessments. The disclosure implications for property sales. She was calm, precise, and used the phrase breach of fiduciary duty with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what it means. Beverly tried to respond twice. Both times, Corbin pointed to the agenda and reminded her that the floor was following proper order. Both times she had to sit back down. She was operating in a format she hadn't designed, following rules she hadn't written, and it showed. The moment, the actual mic drop moment, came when Sean raised his hand and asked a question as a community member, who also happened to have press credentials. He addressed it to Beverly directly. "Ms. Mitch, the HOA financial records show that between March and October of last year, Boyd & Sons was paid $4,400 for work described as common area vegetation management. But 2 of those work orders reference addresses on Clover Ridge Drive, which are private lots, not common areas. Can you explain the discrepancy?" The room went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that has a texture, like heavy air before a storm. Beverly opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The work was adjacent to common areas," she said. "The boundary is not always clear." "The work orders list specific residential addresses," Sean said. He was not being cruel. He was just being accurate, and accurate was enough. 3 rows back, Bart Schilling audibly exhaled. Not a gasp, not a laugh, just the sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding for a long time. The vote took 11 minutes. The membership voted, 30-1, Beverly being the one, to immediately suspend the current board's authority pending a full forensic audit of HOA finances, to rescind all fines issued without proper board approval, and to schedule an election for a new board within 60 days. Patricia, on the laptop screen, notarized the resolution summary digitally and explained what would happen next with the Tennessee Secretary of State's office. After the meeting, I walked Beverly to the door. Not unkindly. She looked 10 years older than she had when she'd walked in. "You know this isn't over," she said. It was said quietly, without heat, almost like a question. "For you, Beverly," I said, "it is." The Sentinel ran the story 4 days later. Clover Ridge HOA president faces fraud inquiry after neighborhood revolt. It wasn't front page. This is a small city, and it was winter, and the Vols had just had an interesting week. But it was above the fold in the metro section, and it was accurate, and it named names, and the county HOA mediation office opened a formal review the same week. Boyd & Sons lost the HOA contract. Boyd & Sons lost 2 other HOA contracts in the same county because Sean's story got picked up by a regional property news aggregator, and other HOA boards did their own searches. Beverly resigned from the board in February. By spring, her house was listed for sale. The forensic audit was completed in April. It found a total of $3,140 in improperly collected fines that were returned to homeowners. Checks mailed out in May, the week before Memorial Day. Mine was $75. Wanda got $225. Dale got the most, at $375. It wasn't life-changing money for any of us. It wasn't supposed to be. The new HOA board was elected in March. Corbin won the presidency, runs the thing with absolute transparency, posts every meeting agenda and set of minutes on a shared drive accessible to every homeowner, holds meetings on the first Tuesday of every month starting at 7 p.m., and has never once hired a contractor without competitive bids and documented board approval. The meetings last 45 minutes, sometimes 30. Nobody has complained. Phyllis stayed on the board and became, somewhat unexpectedly, one of its most effective members. She had 31 years of experience managing rooms full of people who didn't want to be there, which turns out to be excellent preparation for HOA governance. She started a community newsletter, actual news, not edicts, and it's surprisingly good. Dale kept his basketball hoop. His grandkids are over on weekends. You can hear them from the street. Wanda's raised garden beds are still there, still tidy, still producing. This past summer, she had a surplus of tomatoes and left bags of them on neighbors' porches with handwritten notes. The bags had little ribbon handles. It was the most neighborly thing I'd seen all year. Bart got to keep his truck. The red oak out front made it through the winter and leafed out beautifully in the spring. Maybe the best canopy it's had in years, compensating for what it lost with fresh lateral growth. Philip the arborist came back to check on it in April and said the wound site had sealed properly. No fungal penetration. The tree, like the neighborhood, had healed. As for me and Darlene, we're still here. Probably will be for a long time. I'm working on a new shop addition off the back of the house, building it myself, obviously. And on Saturday mornings when the weather's right, I take my coffee out to the porch and sit under that oak and listen to nothing in particular. There's one more thing. The $2,800 from the arborist's damage assessment, I recovered it through a small claims action against the HOA, Tennessee Small Claims Court. Maximum amount, $25,000. You don't need an attorney. The filing fee was $87. Recovery took 4 months, worth every minute. But here's the part I like to think about most. The new board, on Corbin's proposal, took a portion of the recovered fines, the money that had been improperly collected and couldn't be attributed to specific homeowners, and used it to establish the Clover Ridge Community Canopy Fund, a small, permanent fund dedicated to planting and maintaining trees in the neighborhood's common areas, and in the yards of homeowners who want native trees but can't afford the installation. The first planting, in October, put in 12 new trees, red maples, white oaks, dogwoods. One of them went in the corner lot near the entrance, where the street comes into the neighborhood. It's a young white oak, maybe 8 feet tall right now. In 30 years, it'll be the kind of tree someone builds a neighborhood around. I helped plant it. It took about 40 minutes, 2 people, a rented auger, and a bag of composted mulch. Some things take a long time to grow. That's not a flaw. That's the whole point.
You know what hit me hardest about this whole thing? Not the bird, not the 32-1. The $87, that's what it cost Garrett to file a small claim court and recover $2,800 in damage. No lawyer, no suite, just a man, a folder, and a filing fee cheaper than a tank of gas. Beverly had the title, the letterhead, the blazer. She had a brother-in-law with chancellor and a rubber stamp board member who signed whatever was put in front of her. She has every structural advantage a small-town power player could want. What she didn't have was Section 11.4. Forwards, buried 30 pages deep in a document nobody had bothered to read since 1991. Garrett read it, took notes in a legal pad, built a folder, then built a case. While she was printing community truth reports, she was quietly making sure that when the moment came 31 neighbors, one reporter, one laptop with an alternate art screen, there was nowhere left for her to go. Petty power only works when people stay alone and disorganized. Garrett didn't stay alone. So let me ask you straight. Do you actually know what's in your CCNR? The whole thing, not just the part someone highlighted for you. Drop your HOA story below. The worst one gets pinned. If this one hit home, share it with whoever on the street needs to hear it. Surprise, because this folder has more cases in it. The most dangerous person in any HOA isn't the loudest one. It's the quiet one keeping notes.